This week, we saw a massive anti-abortion rally in California's capital. Hundreds of protesters rallied in the intense Sacramento heat, praising the Supreme Court, which has indicated that it will allow states to impose tighter restrictions on abortion, with a ruling which could come any day and possibly overturn the landmark Roe v. Wade decision of 1973. Meanwhile, law enforcement has prepared for an increase in harassment and violence outside abortion clinics in the country. On this special broadcast of the WION-VOA Co-Production with me, Priyanka Sharma, we'll discuss what this upcoming ruling could mean for America and what's at stake. Let's get started now. Americans are waiting on a landmark court case decision at the nation's highest court. The Supreme Court is set to rule on a case that could overturn legal abortion across the country. Voice of America's Jessica Stone has the story. Take a look.
We are waiting outside the U.S. Supreme Court for a decision that could overturn legal abortion throughout this country. In fact, many Americans believe we are now in the last days of legal abortion procedures in every state in the United States. And that's because a draft opinion released and leaked last month shows that some justices plan to overturn Roe v. Wade, a decision made 50 years ago making abortion legal. So as you can see, all eyes now on the U.S. Supreme Court. If Roe v. Wade is overturned, about half American states will no longer allow abortion, and the legal battle will move to the state capitals. About 61% of Americans now favor some sort of legal abortion. It is a monumental moment for people on both sides of this contentious issue.
All life is sacred and precious, and Dobbs has to do with the 15-week-old baby in the womb. And the increase in technology since the 1970s, when Roe versus Wade and Doe versus Bolton were passed by this very U.S. Supreme Court. So the idea here is that, we kind of know more about the unborn child now. And we do know that the unborn child is a unique human being from the moment of conception, fertilization, or however you want to say it. And that at 15 weeks, for sure, there's no doubt that this is a human child. And how can we expect the violence in the streets and the violence in the minds of America to end when we can't even get the violence in the womb to end?
We now have a 50-year precedent that's enabled women to have control over their lives, their bodies, their destinies. And if this is overturned, women's lives will be shattered. They will be shattered by the millions immediately in the 26 states that will immediately gut or severely limit women and girls' access to abortion.
At issue before the court is whether or not abortions can be legal after 15 weeks of pregnancy, that is outside the first trimester. And just for some context, in Europe, abortions are permitted in some cases after 18 to 24 weeks of pregnancy. Jessica Stone, VOA News, Washington.
For more analysis, Voice of America's Jessica Stone now joins us live from outside the Supreme Court. Jessica, thanks for joining us. We just saw your report. As you reported, a majority of Americans now support some sort of access to legal abortion. How has this issue changed over the past 50 years?
Well, for many women across this country, they have grown up in an environment where abortion was legal. So it's not so much viewed as a right or as a privilege, but rather as a right. And so for many Americans, that 61%, they believe in legal abortion access. And at the same time, a pro-life and anti-abortion movement has very much become more powerful across the country. They have been behind a lot of the restrictions at the state level that have been passed throughout this country, and about half of American states. We also, in the last 50 years, have gotten a lot more data on who's getting abortions. We know that most of them are in their 20s, according to the Guttmacher Institute, a pro-abortion rights think tank. They say that most of them are in their 20s, they are low income, and they are minorities. And interestingly enough, they are likely to already have children. Priyanka?
Right, absolutely, Jessica. Let's talk about the global scenario now. Jessica, how does the U.S. abortion law compare to the rest of the world?
Well, most abortions around the world take place in North America, in Europe, and in East Asia. There are much stronger prohibitions against abortion in Southeast Asia, specifically in the Philippines and Laos, where it is illegal to have an abortion under any circumstances. Places like South Korea just made it legal last year. And we know that in terms of the place that is most easy to have abortion services, that is in Europe.
Right, Jessica, thanks for all those inputs on this story. We'll ask you to stay on this special broadcast. We'd like your inputs on another story as well. Thanks for joining us. Let's move on now. Russia's war in Ukraine is now in its 4th month, and now US troops have headed to Europe to defend NATO's eastern flank. But the growing threat from Russia and China has the US looking not only east, but also to the far north. VOA's Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb took to the Arctic skies of Alaska for an exclusive look at the US military's multi-billion-dollar transformation of the remote Eielson Air Force Base. Take a look.
Here we go.
Soaring in an F-16 at the top of the world, backseat with the U.S. Air Force over America's last frontier, Alaska. At times flying faster than the speed of sound.
We are now supersonic.
An F-35, America's newest stealth jet, beside us, a sea of snow-covered peaks below. The tallest in North America, the majestic Denali nearby.
Beautiful, isn't it?
My pilot, Major Lloyd Wright, call sign Bond, has navigated these skies for the last 7 years.
I've flown a lot of places in the world, and this is like the best airspace in the entire planet. It's absolutely a national treasure.
But American fighter jets aren't here for the views.
The military calls this strategic airspace. We've just arrived at the Arctic Circle, and from here, fighter jets can reach anywhere in the Northern Hemisphere in a single flight.
And it's hard to understand that looking at a normal map that stretches Alaska out over the top of the map. But when you look at a globe, it becomes very apparent how close we are to really anything in the Northern Hemisphere.
Europe is just across the Arctic Ocean. Mainland Alaska is less than 100 kilometers from Russia. And Asia just across the Pacific.
We're closer to the Indo-Pacific than they are sitting in Hawaii.
With growing fears of Chinese and North Korean attacks. A few years ago, the Defense Department was looking to close most of Eielson.
DoD argued that the cost to operate and maintain Eielson was expensive due to the environment and the climate in Alaska, and ultimately they proposed a major realignment.
Airspace larger than Florida, right here in Alaska, right behind me, and all of that was on the chopping block.
Alaska Senator Dan Sullivan tells VOA the people of Fairbanks, the city closest to Eielson, pushed back. So did an independent commission set up to evaluate the Pentagon's proposed base changes.
Because they found that it wouldn't actually generate the original savings expected. The commission also argued that Eielson was important as an airbase because it has great air ranges and extensive complexes.
After downsizing Eielson failed to take off, the Air Force did a 180, ordering its training squadron of F-16s to stay put, while deciding in 2016 to add not one, but 2 new squadrons of F-35s. 6 years and 54 of these F-35s later, Eielson is a combat-ready base equipped to fight at a moment's notice. These combat aircraft are worth about $5 billion, and the Pentagon has spent an additional $600 million building more runways, more hangars, more fuel tanks, more upgrades to accommodate the new jets and new people.
It's important. It's always busy here. There's only over about 20 minutes where there's not airplanes flying around right here.
The last 2 jets landed here in April, just in time, Sullivan says, to deter Russia's power plays.
They've been doing bear bomber missions. We've had to scramble more F-22s to go intercept those bombers, probably more than any other time since the mid-1980s. So they're aggressive here too. And the only thing that Putin understands, the only thing, in my view, that Xi Jinping understands in this new era of authoritarian aggression is power.
The new F-35s at Eielson, combined with the F-22s at a base in the state capital, give Alaska more than 100 combat-ready 5th-generation fighters. That's more stealth air power than anywhere else on the globe. Carla Babb, VOA News, Eielson Air Force Base, Alaska.
And And to discuss this further, we still have VOA correspondent Jessica Stone with us on this broadcast from Washington, D.C. Jessica, the friction between the United States and China intensified this week with the U.S. law which went into effect on Tuesday. The Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act forces companies to prove that they are in fact not relying on products made with forced labor from the Western China region known as Xinjiang, of course. So what impact is this measure likely to have on companies and on trade between the world's two largest economies?
Well, there's a lot going on there, of course, Priyanka. This law is supposed to penalize China for forced labor in Xinjiang with the ethnic minority of Uyghurs. But it is a very complicated law to follow for companies, say experts. They are concerned that because these companies, many of them just got the information on Tuesday about how to follow this law, that they will be unable to do so in a neat and tidy fashion. We're just getting customs information, for example, to some of these. This is likely to impact apparel makers and Chinese solar power panel makers, manufacturers and distributors the most because, of course, China is the largest manufacturer around the world of solar panels. And as you said, the key difference here is that this law treats all goods that come from Xinjiang as tainted by forced labor. And so what you have is the need for these companies to prove without a doubt that they have no sourcing in Xinjiang. And because there are so many, the global supply chain is so intricate and interconnected, it is very difficult to do that. We do think in terms of U.S.-China trade, experts tell us that there is likely to be increased separation between the supply chains between the U.S. and China. That's known as decoupling. It's something that both capitals have called for as we see a trend where both capitals are trying to get independent of each other in terms of their supply chain needs. Back to you.
Right, Jessica, this law comes just as we're hearing that the Biden administration is now considering lifting the U.S. tariffs on some $350 billion in Chinese goods to lower the prices for Americans who are, of course, battling inflation right now. Tell us more about that.
Well, the president is definitely conscious that the elections are around the corner for his party in November and that we are at 8.6% inflation. And so this is a step that the government could take in order to ease the burden at the pump. One thing he has already done is ask the U.S. Congress to suspend the gas tax, the federal gas tax, which would have to be passed by Congress, but which could also alleviate some pain at the pump. In terms of whether or not this idea of lifting Chinese tariffs would have real demonstrable impact on American wallets, U.S. Secretary of the Treasury Janet Yellen said it's not likely to have a huge impact, and it also does have implications, of course, for whether or not there is still leverage on Chinese goods. Because remember, this was implemented under the Trump administration in order to underscore that Beijing is not viewed by Washington as having a level playing field for trade. Janet Yellen does support some lifting of the tariffs, and in terms of the timing, what's critical here is we have the G7 on Sunday, as you know, and we understand from the White House that this decision is likely to be made after that. So no relief just yet for American wallets. And I can tell you, I'm watching it every day. The pain at the pump is real here in the United States.
Right, absolutely. Jessica, thanks so much for all those insights. And thanks for joining us on WION and VOA's special co-production this week.